Dr. Leonard Ashford picked up Zara Mitchell's exam paper from the stack on his desk. He didn't hand it to her. He held it up in front of 160 graduate students and read the name out loud. Zara Mitchell. 1 second. Then he dropped it from shoulder height. It skidded across her desk and hung halfway off the edge. You know what I see when I look at this, Miss Mitchell? I see a black girl from Vine City who got a free ride into a room she didn't earn. I see someone who copied the right steps without understanding a single one of them. He turned back to the board. The scholarship that brought you here was an act of charity. This equation is an act of mathematics. Those are not the same thing. He walked back to the center, stopped, turned around like something had just occurred to him. 31 years I've run this seminar. You want to know how many students from your background made it through? I'll save you the math. 0. Not because I didn't give them the chance, because mathematics doesn't grade on sympathy. A small pause, a smaller smile. I'd encourage you to think carefully about whether the bus fare from Vine City every morning is worth what you're going to feel like sitting in that chair by October. Some doors look open. They aren't. He picked up his chalk, began his lecture, like none of it had happened. Zara Mitchell did not flinch. She straightened the paper on her desk and opened her notebook to a clean page. She had no idea, and neither did he, that the equation behind him, the one he had spent 20 years building, was about to be the last thing that ever went the way Dr. Leonard Ashford planned. This is Cipher Uncovers. Drop your city and local time in the comments right now. People everywhere are watching this tonight. If you are new here, subscribe. You are going to want to see what this girl does next. Zara Mitchell was 16 years old, and she had never once in her life taken the easy way anywhere. That wasn't a choice she made. It was the only option she ever had. She lived in Vine City on the west side of Atlanta, in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building where the hallway lights had been flickering since 2019, and nobody had come to fix them. The elevator worked on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and occasionally on Sundays if the weather was right. Every other day, Zara took the stairs. She had been taking those stairs since she was 5 years old, when her mother packed a single bag and walked out the front door and didn't come back. Grandma Ruth was the one who stayed. Ruth Mitchell was 63 years old, and she woke up every morning at 4:15. She made coffee, she read 3 pages of her Bible, and she put on her work clothes. By 5 o'clock, she was on the bus heading to Grady Memorial Hospital, where she worked in the laundry facility washing and folding linens for 8 hours straight. Her hands were dry from the industrial detergent. Her back ached from standing on concrete floors. She came home at 3:30 in the afternoon, made dinner, and asked Zara 2 questions every single day without exception. How was school? Did you learn something real today? Ruth had never gone to college. She had wanted to once. Life had other plans, but she had decided quietly, completely, the way Ruth decided everything, that her granddaughter would go somewhere she never got to. She paid $4 a month for a math forum subscription she found online when Zara was 11. She never mentioned it until Zara found the charge on the bank statement and asked about it. Ruth shrugged. Seemed like something you needed. That was all. Zara had discovered mathematics at age 9 through a water-damaged copy of an introductory number theory textbook she found in a free box outside a thrift store on Donald Lee Hollowell Parkway. The cover was dark blue, with a geometric pattern, a 1993 reprint. She had carried it home under her arm, like she had found something precious, which she had. She read it cover to cover in 4 days. Then she read it again. Then she started solving the problems in the margins with a pencil because she didn't have a separate notebook yet. That book was the beginning of everything. By age 12, she had worked through every math resource the Atlanta Public Library system carried. By 13, she was watching university lecture recordings online, pausing them, rewinding, filling notebooks with her own proofs and extensions. By 14, she had found errors in 2 of the problem sets she was working through and emailed the authors. One didn't respond. The other, a professor at the University of Michigan, wrote back a 3-paragraph reply that ended with, "How old are you?" When she told him, he didn't respond again. She understood. Some people didn't know what to do with the answer. By 15, she was working through graduate-level material on her own, 2 years ahead of where most PhD students began. Georgia Harman University's RISE Pipeline program selected 6 gifted high school students per year from Atlanta public schools. The program gave them access to university courses, faculty mentors, library privileges, and a direct path to advanced academic placement. It had been running for 11 years. In that time, it had produced 2 Rhodes Scholars, 1 Fields Medal nominee, and a long list of students who went on to graduate programs at schools that didn't normally look twice at kids from Atlanta's West Side. Zara was the only black girl selected in her cycle. She was also the only student from a Title I school. The other 5 students came from private academies and magnet programs with AP syllabi and college counselors on staff. They had been preparing for rooms like this for years. Zara had been preparing too. Just differently. The first day she walked into Georgia Harman's Whitfield Hall, she was wearing her school uniform, navy polo khaki slacks, white sneakers that were clean but visibly old. The graduate students around her were in business, casual. Some of them were 10 years older. A few looked at her the way people look at something they don't immediately recognize, not hostility, just a flat, uncomprehending pause before turning away. She found her seat. She opened her notebook. She waited. Dr. Leonard Ashford was 63 years old, Harvard Ph.D., and had been the chair of pure mathematics at Georgia Harman for 31 years. He had written 4 textbooks, 2 of which were still in use at universities across the country. He had advised 3 students who went on to win major national fellowships. His 1994 paper on algebraic number theory had been cited over 400 times in peer-reviewed journals. In the mathematics department at Georgia Harman, his word was the last word on everything: who received funding, who got letters of recommendation strong enough to matter, who moved forward in the program, and who quietly disappeared. In 31 years, not a single black woman had passed through his advanced seminar. He didn't think this said anything about him. He thought it said something about standards, about rigor, about the simple value-neutral fact that mathematics was hard, and most people, regardless of background, weren't built for it at the highest level. He believed this completely. On Zara's first day in his seminar, he had looked at her for exactly 3 seconds when she walked in. Then he had looked back at his notes. He did not introduce himself to her the way he introduced himself to the other new students. He did not ask her name. She was already invisible to him before she had said a single word. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known looking at a 16-year-old girl in a school uniform sitting in the 3rd row, was that the mind behind those tired eyes had been solving problems like his for 3 years already. In the dark, alone, for the love of it. And love, it turns out, is a much better teacher than fear. The first problem set came back on a Thursday. Zara had turned it in 6 days earlier. She had spent 11 hours on it over 2 evenings working at the kitchen table after Ruth went to bed, cross-checking every proof step 3 times before she wrote it in clean. She knew the work was right. Not in the way people say something is right when they hope it is. In the way you know when you have checked it from 4 different directions and it holds every time. Ashford placed the graded papers face down on each student's desk as he moved through the rows. When he reached Zara, he set hers down without breaking stride. She turned it over. B. 1 line of red ink at the top of the page. Answers are correct. Reasoning shows no original thought. She read it twice. Then she read the problems again. Then she read her own solutions line by line, the way you reread something when you're certain you must have missed something. She hadn't missed anything. Every step was documented. Every logical transition was explained. Every proof was complete. She turned the paper face down and looked at the board. 2 days later, Priya Nair got her problem set back. Priya was 26, a second-year doctoral student from New Jersey, methodical and careful, and genuinely kind in the specific way of someone who had been in enough unfair rooms to recognize them. She sat 2 rows behind Zara on the left side of the hall. On Friday afternoon, she found Zara in the library and sat down across from her without asking, and placed her own graded problem set on the table between them. A minus. Strong foundational work. "Look at problem 3, Priya said quietly. Zara looked. Then she looked at her own paper. Problem 3. Same approach. Same structural argument. Same logical sequence. Priya's solution had one additional line of notation that was technically redundant. It added nothing to the proof. Zara's had been graded as showing no original thought. Priya's had been called strong foundational work. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. "I wanted you to see it," Priya said. "That's all." Zara nodded. She closed both papers. She went back to what she had been reading. She didn't say anything to Ashford. Not yet. She understood instinctively the way you understand things, when you have grown up having to be careful that there was no version of that conversation that ended well for her. Not yet. Not without something more than a grade on a problem set. In class, Ashford called on her twice in the first 2 weeks. Both times he got her name wrong. The first time Zahara, or however it's pronounced. The second time Zaria, you in the 3rd row. She corrected him both times, politely, without edge. "It's Zara, Professor." He nodded each time like he was filing it away. Then the following class he did it again. "Zaria, what's your answer to problem 2? By the 3rd week, 3 other students had noticed. Priya had noticed from the first day. A doctoral student named Ben Kowalski in the back row had started writing down each instance in the margin of his notebook, though he hadn't said anything to anyone about it yet. Ashford knew her name. She was certain of that. A man who had been running a seminar for 31 years did not forget a student's name after being corrected 3 times in 3 weeks. This was something else. This was a message delivered in the specific language of institutional power, the language that left no fingerprints. The 3rd week, she stayed after class to ask about the grade. The room emptied around her. Ashford was packing his briefcase. He had his back to her. "Professor Ashford, I had a question about my first problem set." He didn't turn around. "Miss Mitchell." The grade said my reasoning showed no original thought. I was hoping you could tell me specifically what was missing so I could address it going forward. He closed the briefcase clasp, turned around slowly, looked at her the way you look at something you have already made a decision about. "You want specific feedback?" "Yes, sir." He studied her for a moment. Then he pulled his briefcase off the desk and walked toward the door. He stopped when he was beside her, not facing her, just parallel, both of them looking at the empty room. "Miss Mitchell, in 31 years, I have watched a lot of students come through this program full of momentum. Students from your background especially. You arrive in September with energy and a story, and people rooting for you. And then the material gets hard. Not textbook hard, genuinely hard. The kind of hard that doesn't care about your story." He paused. "By October, most of them have gone quiet. By November, they've stopped coming. By December, they've made a reasonable decision to go back to what they know." He started walking again. "I'm not telling you this to be unkind. I'm telling you this because nobody else in this building will. The feedback on your paper was the feedback. If you don't understand what original thought means in this context, that itself is the answer to your question. He walked out. Zara stood in the empty lecture hall. The overhead lights hummed. Outside the tall windows, the Atlanta afternoon was gold and ordinary. Then that same afternoon, Ashford stood at the front of the next class session and held up Priya's problem set. "I want to read you something," he said. "This is what rigorous thinking looks like at this level." He read Priya's solution to problem 3 out loud. Word for word. The same structural argument. The same logical sequence. He called it a model of clarity. He said it demonstrated exactly the kind of original engagement the seminar required. Zara was sitting 3 rows back, holding her own B-graded paper, with the same proof on it. She did not look down. She did not look away. But something behind her eyes went very, very quiet. And quiet for Zara Mitchell was never the end of something. It was always the beginning. It was a Monday morning in late September when Dr. Ashford walked into the lecture hall with a different kind of energy. Not his usual contained authority. Something sharper. Something that had been planned. He set his coffee down on the podium. He faced the room. He didn't open with the usual review of last week's material. "The Georgia Harmon Mathematics Invitational is 6 weeks away," he said. "As you know, the Invitational carries a $12,000 fellowship for the winner and guaranteed advanced placement in the program for the following academic year. This year, I've decided to add a qualifying round." The room shifted. Students exchanged glances. "Starting this week, every student in this seminar who wishes to compete must pass a live board challenge. You'll come to the front one at a time. I'll assign you a problem. You'll have 20 minutes to solve it on the board, no notes, no calculator in front of the class. Pass, and you're in the invitational. Don't pass, and you're not. Simple." He opened a folder on the podium. "We begin Thursday." The problems went out that afternoon via email. Each student received their assigned problem privately. Priya got hers first, a second-year graduate optimization problem, clean and well-defined, the kind of problem that appeared regularly on qualifying exams. Difficult but tractable. The kind of problem a prepared doctoral student could reasonably solve in 20 minutes. Priya forwarded it to Zara that evening with a single line, "Look at what I got." Zara's problem arrived 40 minutes later. She opened it at the kitchen table while Ruth was watching the news in the other room. She read it once, then again. Then she got up, poured herself a glass of water, came back, and read it a third time. It was a nonlinear differential system with 3 layered constraints and a boundary condition that interacted with all 3 simultaneously. It was not a second-year graduate problem. It was the kind of problem that appeared on PhD qualifying exams at research universities. The kind of problem designed to test whether a student had not just learned the material, but had internalized it deeply enough to navigate under pressure. For a 16-year-old, in 20 minutes on a blackboard, in front of a room full of graduate students, it was not a test. It was a statement. Her phone buzzed. "Priya. That's not the same difficulty. Not even close. He gave you a PhD-level problem." "Zara, I know." "Priya, Zara. What are you going to do?" Zara looked at the problem on the table in front of her. She thought about the bus fare from Vine City. She thought about Ruth's 4:15 alarm. She thought about the water-damaged book with the dark blue cover she had carried home under her arm when she was 9 years old, the one that had started all of this. Every late night, and every filled notebook, and every problem she had solved alone in this kitchen, because she loved it, not because anyone had asked her to. She typed back, "The only thing I can do." She studied at the Auburn Avenue Research Library for the next 3 nights, the librarian Ms. Denise, a small woman in her 50s who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and knew every regular patron by name, brought Zara a cup of water at 9:45 on the first night without being asked, and set it quietly beside her notebook without saying anything except, "You've got this, baby." Then she walked away. On the second night, a security guard named Howard told her at closing that she was the last one in the building and he needed to lock up. She packed her things. He walked her to the front door. He looked at her notebook pages dense with equations and said, "Whatever that is, you look like you know what you're doing." She thanked him. She meant it. She took the bus home both nights and arrived after 10. Ruth was awake each time, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of decaf and the crossword puzzle she never fully finished. Hot food was on the stove. Ruth never asked what she was working on. She just made sure there was food. On the second night, "You figure it out yet? Still working? Then eat first. Brain needs fuel before stubbornness does." Zara almost smiled. She sat down and ate. After Ruth went to bed, she stayed at the kitchen table. She taped a photograph of her grandmother inside the front cover of her notebook. Ruth at her 62nd birthday dinner 8 months ago, laughing at something off camera, her reading glasses pushed up on top of her head. Zara smoothed the tape down carefully. Then she opened to a fresh page and kept working. She studied until 3:30 in the morning. She went through the problem from 5 different angles. 2 of them hit walls. 2 of them opened into promising directions that she mapped out fully before she understood their limits. The 5th, a path she found by accident while reviewing a topology concept she had taught herself the previous spring, showed her something. Not the solution, not yet, but the shape of the solution. The place where the answer lived. She wrote 3 words at the top of that page and circled them: "Start here Thursday." She closed the notebook. She went to sleep. Thursday morning, the lecture hall was full. Word had gotten around, the way word always gets around in small academic communities, that the qualifying round problems had not been distributed equally. Some students had come specifically to watch. The front rows, usually populated by the same doctoral students who sat in the same seats every week, were packed. People were sitting on the steps along the side wall. Someone had propped the back door open, and 3 students were standing in the hallway looking in. Ashford stood at the side of the room, arms crossed, folder in hand, coffee untouched on the podium. He looked to anyone who knew how to read him like a man who had already seen how the morning ended. He was wrong about that, but he didn't know it yet. The qualifying round began at 9 o'clock sharp. Ashford called the first student to the board, a third-year doctoral candidate named Carter Webb, no relation to anyone, just a tall, quiet man from Ohio who was good at mathematics and knew it without needing to say so. Carter solved his problem in 14 minutes. Clean work. Efficient. Ashford nodded once and wrote "qualified" next to his name on the roster. 3 more students went. All passed. 2 of them finished with time to spare. The room warmed up the way rooms do when things are going according to plan: low murmurs, the scratch of pens, the occasional quiet exhale. Then Ashford looked down at his roster. Miss Mitchell. The room went still. Zara closed her notebook. She stood up from the 3rd row, and she walked to the front of the lecture hall, the way she walked everywhere, without rushing, without performance, just moving from one place to the next. She picked up a piece of chalk from the tray beneath the board. She turned to face the problem Ashford had written for her in the upper left corner, separated from the demonstration space by a thin vertical line. She read it once. She stood completely still for 40 seconds. The fluorescent lights above the board hummed. Someone in the back row shifted in their seat and the chair scraped, and the sound was enormous in the silence. Priya, sitting in the 4th row on the left, had both hands flat on the desk in front of her. She was not writing. She was not moving. She was watching. Then Zara began. Her handwriting was small and precise. The chalk moved in short, deliberate strokes. She didn't narrate her work the way some students did. She didn't explain each step aloud, didn't perform confidence for the room. She just worked. Quietly. Steadily. The way she had worked alone in the Auburn Avenue Library for 3 nights and at the kitchen table until 3:30 in the morning. At the 5-minute mark, she had translated the nonlinear system into a cleaner form and identified the primary structural constraint. 3 students in the second row leaned forward without realizing they had done it. At the 5-minute mark, something happened. Zara stopped writing. She took one step back from the board and looked at the problem Ashford had written in the corner, the original statement untouched. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she turned around and faced the room. Faced Ashford directly. "Professor Ashford." Her voice was calm, not aggressive, not apologetic, just clear. "There's a sign error in the second boundary condition." The room stopped breathing. Ashford's expression didn't change. Not exactly. But something behind it shifted, a tightening almost invisible, like a door being pulled shut from the inside. "Excuse me," he said. "The second boundary condition has a sign error. As the problem is currently stated, the system has no valid solution in any bounded domain." She paused one beat. "I think you may have intended to write it this way." She turned back to the board. She rewrote the second boundary condition, with the sign corrected. Then she kept working. The room remained completely silent. Ashford did not move from his position against the side wall. His arms stayed crossed. But his coffee, which he had been reaching for absently every few minutes throughout the morning, stayed untouched on the podium for the rest of the session. Zara worked through the corrected problem in 3 clean phases. The first phase she handled by identifying a symmetry in the system that allowed her to reduce the number of active variables. The second phase she resolved using a substitution that eliminated the most complex constraint entirely. The third phase, the one that would have required the most brute computation under a standard approach, she bypassed through a structural argument that collapsed 4 separate terms into one expression. At the 11-minute mark, she wrote the final line. She underlined it once. She set the chalk down in the tray. She turned around and faced the room. 11 minutes. 9 minutes under the clock. The problem Ashford had designed to break her in 20 minutes had taken her 11. Nobody moved. Then, from somewhere in the middle rows, a single pair of hands began to clap. Slow at first. Then a second person joined. Then a third. Within 10 seconds, half the lecture hall was applauding, not the loud, celebratory kind, but the stunned kind, the kind that happens when a room full of people sees something they weren't prepared to see and don't have any other language for it. Priya was not clapping. She was sitting completely still with her hand pressed over her mouth and her eyes very bright. Ashford pushed himself off the wall. He walked to the board. He stood in front of Zara's work and read it. His eyes moved line by line from top to bottom slowly, the way you read something when you are specifically looking for a mistake. Any mistake. Something. Anything. His jaw was tight. He found nothing. He walked back to the podium. He picked up his pen. He looked down at the roster. He wrote qualified next to Zara Mitchell's name without looking up. Then he said in a voice that was entirely level and entirely empty, "Class dismissed." He did not look at Zara. In the hallway, Priya caught up to her and grabbed her arm with both hands. "Do you understand what you just did in there?" Zara looked down at her sneakers for a moment, then back up. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I just made it worse." Priya opened her mouth, then closed it. Because she knew Zara was right. A Harvard-trained professor with 31 years of institutional authority had just been publicly corrected in front of his own seminar, in front of colleagues, in front of students he had cultivated for years by a 16-year-old black girl from Vine City in a school uniform. What does a man like that do next? By midnight, the answer to that question had 60,000 views on the internet, because someone in that lecture hall had their phone out, and the world, it turned out, had been waiting for exactly this. The campus blog picked it up first. A student named Deja Simmons, a junior in the communications program, who ran the Georgia Harmon Independent Student publication from a shared office in the basement of the student union, posted the story at 11:14 the night of the board challenge. The headline read, "16-year-old high school student corrects professor's equation, live, then solves his problem 9 minutes early." She had the blurry phone video embedded in the post, and 3 paragraphs of context she had gathered from students who were in the room. By midnight, the post had 4,000 views. By 6 in the morning, it had 31,000. By the time Zara's first period chemistry class began at John R. Lewis High School, the following Monday, the video had been shared across 4 different platforms, and a local Atlanta news segment had run a 90-second piece on it the previous Friday evening. The anchor had described Zara as a gifted teenager from Atlanta's West Side and shown a still frame from the video. Zara at the board, chalk in hand, back straight, the equation behind her. At Lewis High, every head in the chemistry classroom turned when she walked in. Her teacher, Mr. Okafor, a careful, deliberate man who had taught AP chemistry for 16 years and was not given to displays of sentiment, looked up from his desk and nodded at her with a kind of quiet, unhurried respect she had never received from him before. A girl named Simone from her 3rd period English class stopped her in the hallway and said, "My uncle is an engineer at Delta. He watched your video 4 times. He said to tell you you're the real thing." Zara said thank you and kept walking. At Georgia Harmon, the reaction divided cleanly. Some students, mostly in the middle years of their doctoral programs, people far enough along to be secure, sought her out. 2 stopped her in the library to introduce themselves and ask if she wanted to join their study groups. A professor she had never spoken to stopped her outside the mathematics building and said simply, "Good work." He said it the way you say something you mean. Others, the ones who had barely acknowledged her existence for the first 3 weeks of the semester, now looked at her differently, not warmly, something colder, like she had violated a rule nobody had written down but everyone had agreed to. Like being this good at this age, at this thing in this room, was a kind of transgression that made them uncomfortable in ways they couldn't articulate and didn't want to examine. Ashford made his next move 3 days later. He did it the way a man with institutional power always does these things, quietly, officially, with documentation, and entirely within his stated authority. He filed a formal academic integrity review against Zara, citing concerns regarding the sophistication of the student's board challenge solution relative to her demonstrated prior performance in the seminar. The filing suggested she may have had prior access to the problem before the session. There was no evidence supporting this claim. None. The review process required no evidence to initiate. It required only the signature of a faculty member with standing in the relevant department. Ashford had standing. Zara was not notified through official channels. She found out from Priya, who had heard it from a doctoral student who worked as a teaching assistant and had seen the filing in the department administrative system. Zara was not told she had the right to respond during the initial filing period. She was not told the review existed until it was already 3 days in motion. She found out on a Wednesday afternoon sitting in the Georgia Harmon Library. Priya sat down across from her and put her phone on the table with the filing document pulled up. Zara read it. She read it twice. Then she set the phone down and looked at the window. Outside, the Atlanta afternoon was going gold the way it did in October, the light coming through the oak trees at a low angle that made everything look briefly beautiful. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then he filed it 3 days ago. Yes. And nobody told me. No. Another silence. Okay, Zara said. She picked up her pencil and went back to the problem she had been working on before Priya sat down. Priya watched her for a moment. Then she reached into her bag and placed a thick manila folder on the table beside Zara's notebook. 12 years of old invitational problems, Priya said quietly. I had access to Ashford's files when I was a teaching assistant last year. I made copies for my own preparation. I'm giving them to you. Zara looked at the folder, then at Priya. Why? Priya was quiet for a moment. She looked down at the table. Because I sat in that lecture hall and watched a grown man try to humiliate a 16-year-old girl, and I didn't say a word. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself I couldn't afford the trouble. She looked up. I've been ashamed of that every day since. This is what I can do now. Zara looked at her for a long moment. Then she pulled the folder toward her and opened it. That same afternoon, word spread through the department that Dr. Camille Fontaine of Johns Hopkins University would be attending the Georgia Harmon Mathematics Invitational. Fontaine was one of the most cited mathematicians in the country, known for work in algebraic geometry that had reshaped how the field approached a class of problems that had been considered intractable. She did not normally travel for student competitions. She had not attended the Georgia Harmon Invitational before. She was coming now. That evening, Zara took the bus home to Vine City. Ruth was in the kitchen. There was food on the stove. The crossword puzzle was on the table, 2/3 finished. How was your day? Zara set her bag down. She sat at the table. She looked at her grandmother's hands dry from the industrial detergent, steady as always, and decided that some things Ruth didn't need to carry right now. I learned something real, she said. Ruth smiled and put a plate in front of her. 2 days later, Grandma Ruth collapsed at work. The call came at 2:17 in the afternoon. Zara was sitting in Ashford's seminar when her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. She had it on silent. She always had it on silent during class, but she felt the pattern of the vibration and recognized it immediately. Not a message. A call. Then a second call 30 seconds later. Then a third. She raised her hand. Professor Ashford, I need to step out for a moment. He didn't look up from the board. We're in the middle of a proof, Miss Mitchell. I understand. I need to step out. A beat. He still didn't look at her. Sit down. She was already standing. She walked to the door. She heard him say something behind her, clipped, addressed to the room, but she was already in the hallway with the door closing behind her. She called back the number. Her Aunt Lorraine picked up on the first ring. Zara, baby, listen to me. Your grandmother collapsed at Grady this morning during her shift. They took her to the emergency room. It was her blood pressure. It dropped very low, very fast. She's stable now. She's resting. But the doctors want to keep her overnight for observation. Zara's back was against the hallway wall. She slid down it slowly until she was sitting on the floor with her knees pulled up. Is she conscious? She's awake. She's talking. She's already arguing with one of the nurses about the television remote, so you know she's going to be fine. Lorraine's voice had a careful lightness in it, the voice of someone managing their own fear while managing someone else's. She asked me to call you. She said, a pause, a steadying breath. She said, don't you come to this hospital tonight. She said you finish what you started, baby girl. Those were her exact words. Don't you come to this hospital. You finish what you started. Zara pressed the phone against her forehead. The hallway was long and empty and fluorescent lit. Somewhere down at the far end, a door opened and closed, and a pair of footsteps faded away into silence. She sat on the floor of Georgia Harmon University's mathematics building, and she held her grandmother's message in her chest, like something she was afraid to breathe around. Zara, she's okay. Do you hear me? She is okay. I hear you. The invitational is tomorrow. I know. She watched the qualifying round video 6 times. Did you know that 6 times on my phone? She made me play it on the TV through the Bluetooth thing your cousin Marcus set up. A pause. She's so proud of you, baby. She is so proud. Zara didn't say anything. You still there? Yeah, she said. I'm here. She hung up. She sat on the floor for a while longer. The fluorescent lights hummed above her. She thought about Ruth's hands. She thought about the 4:15 alarm and the bus to Grady and the industrial detergent and the crossword puzzle 2/3 finished on the kitchen table. She thought about $4 a month for a math forum subscription that Ruth had paid for quietly and never mentioned. Then she stood up. She went back into the lecture hall. She found her seat. She opened her notebook. She kept working. That evening, she went to the hospital anyway. She took the number 17 bus to Grady Memorial, walked through the main entrance, and found Ruth's room on the 4th floor. The door was half open. The television was on low. Ruth was asleep, her reading glasses folded on the nightstand beside a cup of water and a small New Testament with a broken spine. Zara sat in the chair beside the bed. She didn't wake her. She just sat there in the low light of the hospital room, with the city outside the window going dark, and she held her grandmother's hand. She stayed for 45 minutes. Before she left, she leaned over and kissed Ruth gently on the forehead. Ruth stirred slightly, but didn't wake. Zara straightened up. She looked at her grandmother's face, the lines around her eyes, the slight downward set of her mouth in sleep, the gray at her temples that had appeared over the last 2 years, and she felt something move through her chest that she didn't have a clean name for. She picked up her backpack. She walked out. She took the bus home to Vine City. The apartment was quiet and entirely itself, Ruth's reading glasses case on the side table, Ruth's cardigan over the back of the kitchen chair, Ruth's crossword puzzle still on the table, the pen lying across the unfinished bottom third. Zara sat at the table. She opened the folder Priya had given her. She spread 12 years of invitational problems across the kitchen table, and she began to read, not solving, just reading, looking for the shape of how Ashford thought the structural choices he made again and again across 12 years of problems, the patterns that revealed a mind's preferences, the way handwriting reveals the hand. By 1 in the morning, she had found it. A recurring approach, a specific type of transformation, he returned to in over 60% of his most difficult problems. A fingerprint. She wrote it down in the margin of her notebook and circled it and wrote 3 words beneath it. He always does this. She studied until 4:15 in the morning, the same time Ruth's alarm went off every day. Then she stopped. She washed her face. She went to her room. She slept for exactly 5 hours. In the morning, she put on the white blouse Ruth had ironed for her the week before, carefully on a Sunday afternoon, humming something low and tuneless, the way she did when she was content. The blouse lay perfectly flat. Every crease was exactly where it should be. Zara stood in front of the bathroom mirror. She looked at herself for a long moment. 16 years old. Tired eyes. A second-hand blouse pressed with her grandmother's hands. She picked up her backpack. She walked out into the Atlanta morning. The sky was pale and the air was cool, and the city was already moving around her, already in motion, already going about the business of the day, indifferent and enormous, and entirely unaware that something was about to happen inside Whitfield Hall that none of them would forget. She took the bus. 52 minutes. She didn't sleep. She looked out the window and watched Atlanta go past, and thought about nothing except the problem waiting for her at the other end of the ride. Whitfield Hall was shaped like an amphitheater, 520 seats arranged in a deep semicircle around a stage that held a rolling chalkboard, 12 feet wide and a single podium with a microphone. The live stream camera was mounted at the top of the back wall, its red recording light already blinking when Zara arrived. Faculty from Emory and Georgia Tech sat in a reserved row on the left side, their name placards visible from the stage. A photographer from the Georgia Harmon Communications office moved quietly along the side aisle. Dr. Camille Fontaine of Johns Hopkins sat in the front row center. She was 61 years old, small and precise in her movements with close-cropped natural hair and a pair of reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She had a leather notebook open in her lap and a pen moving across it before the first round even began. She had flown in from Baltimore the previous evening. She had not attended the Georgia Harmon Mathematics Invitational before. She had not publicly explained why she was attending now. Zara took her seat in the competitor row at the side of the stage. She placed her backpack on the floor between her feet. She looked at the chalkboard. She looked at the audience filling the seats, students, faculty, a handful of people she didn't recognize who had clearly come specifically for this. She looked at the live stream camera. She thought about Ruth in a hospital bed, watching through Aunt Lorraine's phone, and she straightened her back and set her hands flat on her knees. Dr. Ashford stepped to the podium at 9 o'clock exactly. Welcome to the 15th Annual Georgia Harmon Mathematics Invitational. Applause. Polite practiced the sound of an institution performing its own dignity. Round 1 was a written elimination. 18 finalists, 90 minutes, 6 problems of escalating complexity. The competitors sat at individual desks arranged in a row across the stage visible to the entire audience. Zara worked through the first problem in 4 minutes, the second in 6. The third required 11 minutes and a change of approach midway through that cost her 2 minutes of restart time. She noted that and moved on. Problems 4 and 5 fell cleanly. The 6th problem, the most complex, a multi-part proof that most students would spend the final 30 minutes of the session on, she completed, with 31 minutes remaining on the clock. She set her pen down. She folded her hands on the desk. She waited. Ashford walking the stage as Proctor stopped when he reached her desk. He looked at her finished paper. He looked at her. The hall was quiet enough that the people in the first 3 rows could hear the slight pause in his footsteps. He picked up her answer sheet. He looked at it for a long moment, his expression entirely composed. Then, in a voice calibrated precisely to carry to the front rows and the live stream microphone, without appearing to be addressed to anyone in particular, he said, "Finished already, Miss Mitchell? Either you're exceptional or you didn't understand what was being asked." He set the paper back down on her desk. He walked away. In the front row, Dr. Fontaine stopped writing. She looked up. She watched Ashford walk to the next desk. She wrote something in her notebook. Then she looked at Zara. Zara had not moved. Her hands were still flat on the desk. Her eyes were forward. If she had heard him, and she had heard him, the entire front half of the hall had heard him. Nothing in her face showed it. Nothing except the very slight, very deliberate way she picked up her pen and wrote one additional line of verification at the bottom of her final proof. Clean, unhurried, making sure. Then she set the pen down again and waited. Zara scored the highest in round 1. The gap between her score and the second-place finisher was not small. The 10 lowest scorers were eliminated. 8 competitors advanced to round 2. Before round 2 began, Ashford stepped to the microphone. A brief adjustment to today's schedule. He said it the way you say something you have prepared to say casually. The faculty gauntlet round will now take place during round 2 rather than following it. I believe this better reflects the kind of adaptability that genuine mathematical thinking requires. A pause. Mathematics, like life, doesn't always proceed on the schedule we prefer. Light, polite laughter from several faculty members who didn't know what they were laughing at. Zara felt the floor shift. She understood immediately. There was no final round for her to reach, the faculty gauntlet. The round in which Ashford personally assigned each competitor a problem was happening now. If she failed this problem, she was finished. No second stage, no safety net. The structure had been rearranged specifically to eliminate the possibility of recovery. 6 competitors went through the gauntlet before her. Each received a sealed envelope. Each walked to the board, broke the seal, read the problem, and had 30 minutes to solve it publicly. The problems were difficult. 2 competitors failed. 4 passed. The audience watched each one with the focused, evaluative attention of people who understood what they were seeing. Then Ashford picked up the final envelope from the table beside the podium. He held it for 1 beat longer than he had held any of the others. The hall was quiet. "Miss Mitchell, please come to the stage." 520 people watched Zara stand up from the competitor row and walk up the 4 steps to the stage. Her footsteps were steady. Her back was straight. She was wearing Ruth's ironed white blouse and her school uniform slacks and her old white sneakers, and she walked across that stage like it belonged to her, because right now, in this moment, it did. Ashford held the envelope out to her. When she reached for it, he leaned in slightly close enough that only she could hear him above the ambient sound of the hall. "This is real mathematics, Miss Mitchell, not a performance." She took the envelope. She walked to the board. She broke the seal. She pulled out the paper and read it. The room watched her face. She read the problem once, then again. Then she looked up at the board in front of her, 12 feet wide, clean white surface, a single piece of chalk in the tray. The problem in her hands was the central equation from Ashford's landmark 1994 paper, the proof that had made his career. The work he had described in 3 published interviews as having taken him 20 years to develop. The problem that had been cited over 400 times in the literature. At the bottom of the page, in small, clean type, 20 minutes. Zara set the paper on the small desk beside the board. She picked up the chalk. She looked at the equation one more time. Then she began to write. And for the first 8 minutes, everything went exactly as it should have. The first 8 minutes were clean. Zara translated the problem into a leaner form, stripping away the notational weight that Ashford's original paper carried from the conventions of its era. She identified the primary algebraic structure underneath. She made 2 opening moves that were precise and efficient and caused Dr. Fontaine in the front row to sit forward almost imperceptibly in her seat. The audience, the ones who understood what they were looking at, began to lean in. At minute 9, Zara slowed. The transformation she had been building toward wasn't closing. A variable at the center of the 3rd constraint was behaving in a way that contradicted her approach. She stepped back from the board. She stared at what she had written. She picked up the eraser and removed the last 4 lines. She tried a second approach, came at the constraint from the opposite direction, reorganized the primary terms, rebuilt the bridge she needed. It stalled at line 6. She erased again. Tried a 3rd path. This one looked promising for the first 5 lines. Then it collapsed against the same wall the second approach had hit. Minute 14. Ashford leaned toward the judge seated beside him. His voice was just above a whisper. Controlled. Satisfied. And there it is. The judge glanced at the board and nodded once. In the 4th row, Priya sat with her hands pressed together in her lap, Knuckles' pale eyes fixed on the stage. She had not blinked in 3 minutes. In a hospital room 4 miles away, Ruth Mitchell was awake. Aunt Lorraine was holding her phone up at an angle so Ruth could see the live stream from the bed. Ruth's reading glasses were on. Her hands were folded over the blanket. She was watching her granddaughter stand at a chalkboard in front of 500 people, and she was not making a sound. Minute 16. Zara set the chalk down in the tray. She took one step back, then another. Her shoulders dropped just slightly, just enough. The audience read it the way audiences read bodies, instinctively, collectively. A shift moved through the hall. People who had been holding their breath began to breathe again, but not with relief, with something heavier. Ashford began to rise from his chair. Slowly, the controlled, inevitable rise of a man who has seen exactly what he expected to see and is preparing to formalize it. Zara looked at the floor. She stayed there for a long moment, looking down the chalk tray behind her 520 people in front of her, the live stream camera in the back wall recording all of it. She looked like a 16-year-old girl who had just run out of road. Then she closed her eyes. She thought about Ruth. Not the Ruth in the hospital bed, the Ruth at the kitchen table at 4:15 in the morning, with her coffee and her Bible and her 3 pages before work. The Ruth who paid $4 a month without saying anything. The Ruth who ironed a blouse on a Sunday afternoon, humming something low and tuneless. The Ruth who had raised her in a building with a broken elevator and never once suggested that the ceiling above them was the ceiling above her. She thought about the free box outside the thrift store on Donald Lee Hollowell Parkway. The dark blue book. The way it had felt under her arm on the walk home. The way she had read it in 4 days, not because she had to, but because she could not stop. She thought about why she had started doing this, not to prove anything to anyone in this hall, not to beat Leonard Ashford, not to win a fellowship. She had started because at 9 years old, she had opened a book and seen something so beautiful it had made her chest ache, and she had spent 7 years chasing that feeling across every library book and late-night notebook and free online lecture she could find. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. She opened her eyes. She looked at the board, but not at her failed attempts. She looked at Ashford's original equation, clean and untouched at the top of the board where she had transcribed it at the beginning. She looked at it the way you look at something when you stop trying to force it and simply look. And she saw it. A path through algebraic topology, a cross-disciplinary bridge between the topological structure underlying Ashford's number theory problem and a class of geometric transformations she had taught herself the previous spring from a textbook she had found at the Auburn Avenue Library, a textbook that was not on any standard graduate curriculum because it sat at the intersection of 2 fields that professional mathematicians were trained to keep separate. She had not been trained to keep them separate. She had not been trained at all. She had just read everything she could find and followed what was beautiful. She picked up the eraser. She wiped the entire board clean. A sharp, collective murmur ran through 520 people. Heads turned. Someone near the back said something that got immediately hushed. Ashford, halfway out of his chair, went still. 4 minutes left on the clock. Zara picked up the chalk. She took one breath. She began again. Move 1, she reframed the problem entirely, translating Ashford's combinatorial structure into geometric language. The equation that had filled half the board in her earlier attempts became 5 lines. In the front row, Fontaine stopped writing. She simply watched. Move 2, she identified 3 terms in Ashford's original equation that were expressions of the same underlying geometric structure, invisible in the number theory, framing obvious in the topological one. She circled them. She wrote a single substitution. The 3 terms collapsed into one. A professor in the 3rd row whispered something. The person beside him grabbed his arm. Move 3, she bypassed the brute calculation at the heart of Ashford's published proof, the 4-page derivation in section 2.4 that had made the paper famous for the sheer persistence of its construction using a symmetry argument that showed the result had to hold by structural necessity. 4 clean lines, no iteration, no force. She wrote the final line. She underlined it once. She set the chalk down. She turned around. Her voice was quiet and steady and carried to every corner of the hall. The proof holds Professor Ashford, and the substitution in Step 2 reduces the 8-page derivation in Section 2.4 of your 1994 paper to 3 lines using the same symmetry argument I've shown here. Dr. Camille Fontaine of Johns Hopkins University stood up. She was the first one clapping. The applause began with Fontaine and moved through the hall like water finding level. Priya was on her feet with both hands pressed over her mouth and tears running freely down her face. The doctoral student Ben Kowalski, the one who had been quietly writing down every mispronounced name in the margins of his notebook for weeks, was standing with his hands above his head. Students who had looked through Zara in hallways for 2 months were clapping with everything they had. 2 faculty members from the Emory delegation were shaking their heads slowly, the way people shake their heads when the only other option is to say something inadequate out loud. The live stream chat was moving too fast to read. Ashford stood at the judge's table. He did not clap. He walked to the board and stood in front of Zara's work. His eyes moved across it line by line slowly from top to bottom. His jaw was tight. His breathing was controlled and deliberate in the way of a man who has spent 63 years mastering the appearance of composure. He checked every line. He went back to the substitution in Step 2 and checked it again. He followed the symmetry argument in Move 3 to its conclusion and stood there for a moment with his eyes on the final line. He found nothing wrong. Dean Angela Reeves had been sitting in the judges' row throughout the competition. She was 60 years old, unhurried in everything she did, with the specific authority of someone who had earned it through patience rather than volume. She stood up now and walked to the center of the stage. The applause gradually settled as people noticed her. She turned and faced Ashford directly. "Leonard," her voice was clear and even, "is the solution valid?" The hall went silent. Ashford did not move for a long moment. He stood with his back to the audience facing the board. 520 people watched the back of his head. The live stream camera recorded it all. 5 seconds. 10. Then he turned around. He looked at the audience. He looked at the board. He looked briefly for less than 1 second at Zara, who was standing quietly to the side of the stage, with her hands at her sides and her face entirely composed. He took a long breath through his nose. The methodology is unconventional. Each word arrived separately, pulled out by force. The result is correct. Dean Reeves nodded once. She turned to face the hall. The judging panel confirms the solution is valid. The winner of the 15th Annual Georgia Harmon Mathematics Invitational is Miss Zara Mitchell. The hall erupted. Not polite applause. Real noise. People were on their feet cheering. 3 students near the middle were recording on their phones. Someone near the back let out a sound that was half laugh and half something else entirely. Priya sat back down in her seat because her legs had stopped cooperating, and then immediately stood back up. Zara nodded once. She walked to the edge of the stage and picked up her backpack from where she had left it at the bottom of the steps. She walked down the steps slowly. She did not look at Ashford as she passed him. In the hallway outside the hall, Dr. Camille Fontaine caught up to her before she had taken 20 steps. "Miss Mitchell." Fontaine held out a business card. "My name is Camille Fontaine. I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins." I'd like to talk to you about a research fellowship at our institute. Full funding, room board, tuition, faculty mentorship. Available immediately upon your high school graduation if you're interested. Zara looked at the card, then at Fontaine. Take your time, Fontaine said. Talk to your family. Think it through. She paused. I came here today because I saw a video of a 16-year-old correcting a boundary condition error in real time. I wanted to see if the rest was real. A small pause. It's real. Zara held the card carefully with both hands. Fontaine turned to Dean Reeves, who had followed them into the hallway. Her voice remained conversational and pleasant, and carried the particular weight of someone who did not need to raise it to be heard. Dr. Reeves, I'd like to request the scoring rubrics from all 3 rounds of today's competition, and from the qualifying board challenge held in Dr. Ashford's seminar earlier this semester. I noticed some irregularities in the problem distribution I'd like to understand better strictly for professional review purposes. Dean Reeves held Fontaine's gaze for a measured moment. Of course, Doctor. Fontaine, you'll have them within the hour. The 2 women nodded at each other. Small exchange. Enormous meaning. 10 feet down the hallway, Ashford stood alone. He had heard every word. His face had moved past pale into something grayer and more permanent looking. The face of a man watching something he built for 31 years develop a crack he cannot repair. Dean Reeves turned to him. Her tone did not change. Leonard, Zara's solution will be written up and submitted to the Annals of Mathematics for peer review. As department chair, you'll co-sign the submission as her faculty advisor. Standard departmental practice for exceptional student work. Ashford said nothing. You'll sign it Monday morning, Reeves said. She walked away. Priya found Zara near the water fountain at the end of the hallway. She pulled her into a hug without asking. Zara stood still for a moment, surprised maybe, and then put her arms around Priya and held on. I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner, Priya said. You deserved better from me. You spoke when it counted, Zara said. That's enough. That evening, after the hall had emptied, and the stage lights had been left on by someone who forgot to turn them off, Zara went back inside alone. 520 empty seats, her work still on the board. Someone had taped a handwritten sign over it in blue marker, "Do not erase." She stood in front of it for a long time. Her phone buzzed. A message from Aunt Lorraine she watched every second. She's crying. She says to tell you that's my girl. That has always been my girl. She is so proud of you, baby. So proud. Zara read the message 3 times. She took out her phone, cracked screen, lower left corner, the crack that had been there since January, and she photographed the board. She sent the photo to Aunt Lorraine with no caption. She stood there a little longer in the empty hall with the stage lights on, and the city outside the high windows going dark and quiet, and she felt something settle in her chest that had not been settled in a very long time. Miles away in his office in the mathematics building, Dr. Leonard Ashford sat alone at his desk. The room was dark except for the lamp. In front of him was Zara's first graded problem set, the flawless one he had handed back with a B, and the note reasoning shows no original thought. He stared at it for a long time. He picked up his red pen. He crossed out the grade. He wrote a single letter above it. He put the pen down. He turned off the lamp. He sat in the dark. Outside in Whitfield Hall, Zara's proof stayed on the board exactly as she had written it. It stayed there for 11 days. Zara Mitchell never walked into that hall to prove anyone wrong. She walked in carrying 7 years of love for numbers, for truth, for a grandmother who woke at 4:15 every morning so her granddaughter could sleep in a world bigger than the one they were given. Talent doesn't wait for permission, and neither does the truth. If this story moved you, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you know someone who's been told they don't belong somewhere they were born for, send them this tonight. Subscribe if you want more stories like this, because the world needs to hear them.